Hey everyone, Tony D with another hot take. This one about what else? Immigration. Um, Trump dropped a bomb and said, "Hey, I'm closing the borders," and now everybody's up in arms. Wasn't much to do about it at the press conference. Oddly enough, I watched it with watching the stream on Louder with Crowder, which was pretty good, by the way. Oh, before I forget, smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Please check out my books, Woke Standard Novel and The Pineys, books 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ebook, trade paperback, Kindle Unlimited is free. Audiobooks coming soon. Also, The Webcomic Factory at thewebcomicfactory.com and Superfrat at superfrat.com. New comics today on both. So, what are we doing about immigration? What is Trump doing? He's closing the borders. It's a temporary measure, and it's about the pandemic. Now, is it totally about the pandemic? Well, it's also a chess move. It also trumps the Democrats' sort of weird, okay, we're going to do everything the opposite of Trump, and we're going to eliminate the border functionally, which is what they did during the primary, or said they want to do. You can't eliminate the border if you believe that there is anyone you don't want to let in your country. You need a border, functionally. I mean, that's all there is to it. In a libertarian utopia, it wouldn't matter because there would be nothing here but private property and people incredibly armed to protect that private property. So illegal immigrants wouldn't come here because they would only come here legally, because they would know by coming here illegally they would be vulnerable to being shot by any rando citizen whose property they stepped on. They would also be worried about getting a job, because in a libertarian society, getting the job would require some sort of some sort of passage to get to that job in America. You couldn't just come here. You would want to arrange things. Now, that wouldn't mean like anybody who walked across the border would be shot, because libertarians ultimately don't want borders, but that's kind of a downstream thing, I think. But it would mean that you would you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't be able to get work unless you found somebody who was willing to do all the proper things. And it would also be tough. Part of the reason so many immigrants come here isn't just for the jobs. A lot of people think that's the case. They also come here because we have a good medical system, a good educational system, which is free to anyone who comes here, basically, because it's illegal for your kids not to be in school if they're a certain age. So if you could just get across the border and find a place to live, you just register your kids at school and they go, and people take them. Now, if that didn't happen, that would eliminate a lot of reason for why people come here. A lot of people come here for their kids. If you said, well, no, you can't register at this school, you're an illegal alien, we're not allowed to take you, we'll lose our funding, or, this is a private school, you need money, they would simply not take them. And you wouldn't even have to make a law. They just wouldn't take them. They would say, well, no, U.S. citizens get preferential treatment here. You can't come here, and unless you had some money, in which case you'd probably emigrate legally. But since we have this situation, this very complex situation, we don't live in a libertarian paradise. You have to compromise, and part of that compromise, in this particular instance, is closing down the border in order to stop any potential infected illegal aliens from infecting people. Because, it would be bad enough if someone got sick and died from the beer virus. How much worse would it be if the person that got you sick didn't even belong in this country and broke the law to get here? And there's all kinds of reasons why Trump is going to shut the borders, but it's easier, I think, to create rules regarding the borders. And keep in mind, Mexico wants to close the borders too. They were making noise about it during the virus because they perceived us as having more cases because we're doing more testing, and then they were like, well, wait a minute, maybe we have to close the border. Maybe we don't want you to come here. So, you need to control the border in the case of a pandemic. So, I have no problem with a very temporary closing of the border. All border closings will be temporary in the United States. You can't do business with a closed border. And we're a capitalistic society, so it'll be very temporary. Um, but, that being said, people are going to be losing their minds. But not as much as you think, because they were talking about it on Crowder, saying that some polls show whopping percentages of America agree with closing the border now. Like, I don't know, some crazy amount, like 90%. But they also said that they may have been a more right-leaning poll. But still, that's a pretty high number. And I would think that most people with common sense would say, well, yeah, I think we have to close the border, at least for a while, until we get things straightened out here. So, I mean, I don't see it as a good thing. I see it as a necessary thing. And it's not going to be permanent. It's just not. It can't be. But in the meantime, that'll make things a lot easier on the southern border. You just send back everybody. Say, look, you can't come here right now. And hopefully that will also force people trying to sneak into America to say, well, I'm not going to sneak in now because they closed the border. Lord knows how long it's going to be closed. Sneaking in now would be really, really tough. And why should I give my money to those coyotes? Well, I should go back to my village or wherever I live and just use the money to live for a while. And maybe, during that time, people could, in Mexico and other places, hopefully make their country nice enough to want to stay. Maybe, I don't know, work on things there. It's part of the problem with immigration. You get a bit of a brain drain. Even during the good old days of immigration, we were only taking the skilled workers and the smart people and the people with money and the healthy. And we were sending back sick people. Some of the old people got sent back. People without skills, they got sent back. So, what does that do to the country that they're leaving? Now not only have all the able-bodied people, they got problems, that's why they're leaving, and then all the able-bodied, talented people leave and go to another country, kind of makes the problem back at their home country worse. So, maybe it's a good thing, at least temporarily, for these other countries as well, because there is a virus, and they got to deal with that too, and they may not be able to deal with it like America can. Basically we just throw money at everything until it stops. So, or until we figure out a way to make money on it. So I think, the reaction to immigration has been surprisingly muted. I haven't seen a giant protest against the idea of closing the borders, which is good because maybe we're kind of unified on the subject a bit. Maybe people are like, okay, yeah, let's close the doors for a couple of weeks or month or whatever. And then meanwhile, we can get things rolling. I mean, I've always said that we need to fix things at home. It's one of the reasons I want to bring the troops home. You bring home all the troops, you bring home all those resources and people and money. You're not spending money overseas, and you fix up this country. And then, when everything's rolling great here, you could then say, okay, all right, we got most of our ducks in a row. Who else needs help? Unless there's a major emergency. And, like a natural disaster emergency I'm talking about. Not like a war. Because getting involved in other people's wars, there's just no end to it, as we've seen. So I think immigration, there could be a lot of good, if there is any good, that comes out of the virus, in that it alters people's behavior somewhat with regard to their thinking about immigration, their thinking about overseas, and their thinking regarding globalism, because a lot of this stems from the idea that, well, we're a global community now, and that's why we need to be overseas in so many countries with so many military bases. That's why we need to have 95% of our medical stuff being built in China. It's so much cheaper. But you see, when there's a problem, this idea of globalism doesn't work. It's better to have decentralization, because you don't want a situation like this where, China has got us, in a bad position, not totally bad, but in a bad enough position that we have to worry about our medical situation. I mean, what if China really screws us on some of this medical stuff coming through? They already sent thousands and thousands of tests to Spain and they didn't work. So that's not good. That's really not good. This is a communist government you're talking about, and they are pretty ruthless. They are looking to win this sort of global game of world politics, and they have to use underhanded means because their system is terrible. It essentially collapses into a dictatorship the moment it starts, and that's where we're at. Z is essentially a dictator, and he is pretty much consolidated power. I'm sure he took advantage of the virus to eliminate any of his enemies. It's a perfect opportunity to. And any of the dissidents he wanted to disappear. It's a perfect opportunity. I mean, look, he made patient zero disappear. He made one of the whistleblowers disappear. There's some new whistleblowers who are sick now. They're so sick, their livers, this is a crazy story I saw. Apparently their livers are malfunctioning to the point at which their skin has darkened. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, they look black. It's crazy. And there's a whole thing with black people in China. Super racist, it turns out, in China against black people. So this is like the most ironic thing I've ever heard happen to people. And oddly enough, these two doctors were also associates of the whistleblower. So they're very sick. Which, does not bode well for them if they were his associates and the Chinese government decides, we can let these guys die. We don't need them. Anyhow, getting back to the point of all this rambling, we're talking about immigration. Letting people in your country without any constraints whatsoever is just foolish. It's just totally foolish. So if you have any constraints, even if you're only going to say, well, criminals, we're not going to let serial killers into the country. Then you have to stop each person and check to see if they're a serial killer. And you're going to have a system in place in order to stop them, in order to stop people who just don't listen to the rules. And so we need a border that makes sense. And right now it's the wall. I'm not a huge fan of the wall, the physical barrier itself, but I think if we eliminated most of the incentives to be here, we would have a better system. And we wouldn't be flooded by thousands. It would be a moot point. The amount of people who would come here would be very little. But in terms of this particular quarantine, for now, I'm okay with Trump closing the borders. Like anything else, I want to monitor the situation. If he continues to close it too long, that could be bad. If this is just an excuse to push his agenda, it's not great. But if the side effect is he gets control of things for a while during this pandemic and the pandemic ends sooner, then maybe okay. I don't know. We'll have to see. I have to monitor the situation. But I don't see a hell of a lot of pushback from the Democrats right now. And in fact, they seem to be pivoting to try to be more anti-China than Trump. So fancy that. Anyhow, that's the hot take. Keep watching the skies. We'll see you next time.